So this is going to be the first episode of my new Moneyball transfer series where I prioritise statistical analysis before the eye test, specifically looking for statistical outliers when plotted against two different metrics. So if we look at the first graph, we've got non-penalty goals plotted against non-penalty XG, both per 90, from this season in the top 7 European leagues. The dotted green line at about 45 degrees represents a non-penalty XG over or under performance. Higher than the green line is going to represent an overperformance, with under the green line obviously representing an underperformance. The further you are to the right, the higher your non-penalty XG is, and so the strikers who are creating high-value chances for themselves frequently, but also clinical when taking them, are going to be positioned towards the top right of the graph. If you're able to interpret the data in this graph, you can very quickly get an idea of how good a player actually is based on their current output over the last season across two separate metrics. The strikers who sit around this area on the different graphs I'm going to show you throughout this video are the ones who you would consider statistical outliers. And they might not always be that expensive once you consider the objective statistical output that they are currently producing. But before I reveal the players in this area for this graph, as well as for the other graphs in this video, if you want to check out any cheap, good quality football jerseys, go over to jerseyfever.co. They've got a variety of different current season and retro jerseys, including the new season Manchester United releases for the upcoming season. They also sent me over this Manchester United 2006-2007 white away shirt with Ronaldo 7 on the back, as well as this Zinedine Zidane Juventus shirt from the 1990s. You can use code ATLANTIS at checkout for a 10% discount, so if you want to check out any of their shirts, I'll leave it linked in the description and in the comment section below. So what you can see from this graph is that Alexander Sorloth, at least from a statistical per 90 perspective, has been producing the highest goal scoring output this season. Patrick Schick and Max Merdink, who is RZ's soon-to-be 22-year-old centre-forward, like Sorloth, also massively overperformed their non-penalty XG, which does show how clinical they have been, but Sorloth being further to the right does show that he is still scoring at a fairly sustainable rate despite the crazy overperformance, because even if he does drop down to the on-par XG line, he is still only behind Goncalo Ramos when it comes to non-penalty XG. But even still, both Schick and Merdink are both producing a fairly high non-penalty XG, and so would be players to definitely keep an eye on. Essentially, the best area on the graph to focus on is above the green line, as far right as possible, and the closer to the line, the more sustainable their goal scoring rate currently is. And when we look at this particular area, we see Lewandowski and Gyökeres as expected, but it certainly was a surprise to see Matteo Retegui and former Arsenal player Mika Bierek competing with Gyökeres and Lewandowski. Now, Bierek did play around half of the minutes that Retegui did, having moved to Monaco in just January, but the former Arsenal player is producing such high-level goal-scoring output over a fair period of time, at least in the short to mid-term, and so along with Sorloth and Retegui, I'd have to put him on the list of considerations. Goncalo Ramos does rank very highly for his non-penalty XG, but was one of the biggest non-penalty XG underperformers alongside Hugo Ekitike. Considering he only played just over 1,100 minutes and picked up a decent amount of goals coming off the bench for PSG, I think it's fair to say that his data is a bit skewed, and so you'd have to consider that non-penalty XG rate inflated. But the two other interesting areas on this graph are around Mbappe and Haaland, the players who at the end of last season, the majority of the football world would have still considered as the two best goal scorers in world football, but also the area underneath it, the XG underperformers. Rodrigo Muniz is someone who stood out previously when I've looked for his FB ref report, as well as when watching him over the past few seasons for Fulham. See, when you watch him play, his physical maturity and intelligence against Premier League centre-backs does make you think of him as an older striker like a Mateta, around 27-28, but in fact he only just turned 24. He has got 1 year left on his contract, but there is a club option of a 1 year extension, so really it's 2, meaning that Fulham don't really have to sell, but this summer would be the optimal time to sell, just like with Mateta and Crystal Palace. Benfica's Pavlidis was a surprising one, as his non-penalty XG is practically level with Gyökeres, he just isn't overperforming it to the same level. However, like Victor Boniface at Bayer Leverkusen, he played less than 1,500 minutes, whilst Gyökeres had a sample size of over double, over 3,000 minutes. But just quickly, before I show you the next few graphs, because this graph is optimal for goal scoring in isolation, if a player is looking good on this particular graph without some underlying reasons for the data being skewed, they should definitely be considered. If we take the Eredivisie and Portuguese League out because of the skewing due to the competition quality, I think Marseille's Amin Gouiri, Yohan Wissa and Ademola Lookman, despite not really being a centre forward, all should go straight on the considerations list, alongside the two young forwards Emmanuel Imega at Strasbourg and Moise Kean at Fiorentina, both scoring at a sustainable rate with a high non-penalty XG, as well as Bergkamp and Ferran Torres higher up, but also Undav Mikatadze and Max Bayer, who all sit just outside the optimal area, but are worth keeping an eye on in case they do rank highly on other metric graphs. Now the next graph is going to be similar, non-penalty XG plus expected assists against non-penalty goals, both being per 90. This graph will give us a better visual idea of how complete a striker is, in terms of their goal scoring alongside their goal creation. And for centre forwards, the Ballon d'Or level players are the ones who are consistently, season after season, able to produce output towards the top right of this graph. The higher up on the y-axis the player is, the more non-penalty goals he scored per 90, whilst the further to the right, the better they are at creating high-value chances for themselves and others. Now this graph is probably best for looking at a centre forward's current ability, with the graph I'll show you in a minute or two being better for finding potential, allowing us to find centre forwards with highly complete skill sets who, like Hugo Ekitike, haven't yet got the composure or the technique in front of goal in order to be able to convert their XG efficiently. But if we look at the centre forwards on this graph, once again we see Mika Vieira out in front, with only Patrick Schick and Alexander Sorloth with more non-penalty goals per 90, and even when factoring in the chance creation side of his game with his expected assists, he has still been producing elite level output over the last 6 months. And so far Matteo Retegui and Mika Vieira are the clear standouts, with most of the chasing pack from the previous graph also slightly behind them on this one as well, maybe suggesting that the non-penalty XG could be skewing things slightly. And so if we take the non-penalty XG out and just go with the expected assists against non-penalty goals, you can see that Retegui drops back significantly, now sitting behind Ferran Torres, Bergkamp and Amin Gouiri, suggesting that the Atalanta striker is very much a poacher style of forward, whereas Mika Vieira, despite initially from the eye test looking to me like he would stylistically classify as more of a poacher type of striker, his expected assist rate does show that chance creating wise he is significantly better than Retegui, thereby showing statistical evidence for the Monaco striker having a more complete skill set. But it's not just that, as really only Omar Mamouche has been able to keep pace with Vieira, but also the positioning of strikers like Schick, Sorloth and Muniz I think is a very good representation of their skill sets and what style of strikers they are. High goal scoring volume, minimal in terms of chance creation, which could be perfect for United alongside a playmaker to their right, who can operate in deeper central areas, responsible for linking play between the lines, and thereby allowing an advanced target man type of striker like one of those three, or Gyökeres or Osimhen, to sit higher alongside the two centre-backs, looking to provide the movement in behind the back line. Ferran Torres, Bergkamp and Gouiri once again look promising, and whilst Ekitike ranks lower down for his non-penalty goals, factor in his massive underperformance in his non-penalty XG this season, the most in Europe's top 5 leagues by over 5 goals. Even if he was to slightly underperform his non-penalty XG over the next few seasons, you would expect him to be sitting around where Kylian Mbappe is in this graph, which is a statistical point that can't be ignored when judging not just Ekitike's long-term potential, but even just his likely output and performance level for the next 1 or 2 seasons. And you can see that here, as if he was hitting his non-penalty XG exactly, which is definitely a possibility even as soon as next season, considering in previous seasons in both Liga and the Bundesliga, where he has on more than one occasion significantly overperformed his non-penalty XG, he would actually rank in a higher position on this graph than Mbappe. If we then add back Gyökeres and Pavlidis for this one, you can see that non-penalty XG wise they are about level, but Gyökeres is a far better chance creator, which is just one aspect of his game that would lead me to saying he has a more complete skill set than the Greek. And just before we finish, if we quickly look at headed goals and non-penalty XG, as I have said before, that offensive aerial threat is massively underrated and underused as a goal creation strategy by teams, unless of course they are chasing a goal at the end of the game. But having an elite level aerial threat inside of the box, such as Victor Osimhen, can also bring huge goal scoring value throughout a game, particularly against deep defensive systems. Merdink and Schick do sit as outliers, and so I would consider both of consideration, particularly Merdink, as given he's only 21, and hasn't been talked about that much, he almost certainly wouldn't be that expensive. But also you can see that while Sorloth, Pavlidis and Retegui's graph positioning shows them to be highly valuable from aerial situations, Gyökeres and Vieira on the other hand aren't significant aerial threats at all. And so in conclusion, Vieira and Retegui have been producing top level goal scoring output, and whilst it does have to be taken into consideration that Vieira's output is only on around half the sample size of Retegui, he is producing significantly higher chance creation output compared to Retegui, as both players' expected assists show. Alongside this, if Gyökeres at £70 million is worth a high amount of interest, then Pavlidis at Benfica, at the age of 26, for around £35 to £40 million up front, maybe with add-ons on top, should also be a deal that United at least consider. As I said previously in a video analysing Sorloth and Schick, which will be linked in the eye above, they both would be very good options as advanced target mans, as Sorloth's goal scoring output alongside the rest of his skill set is too impressive not to consider for around 30 to 35 million, even if he is turning 30 at the end of the year. When it comes to a different style of centre forward, whilst Amin Gouiri isn't as complete as Ekitike when it comes to his chance creation, dribbling and carrying, he is still stylistically similar enough to be considered an alternative as a complete centre forward, given the freedom to roam wide and deep from that central position, which was a tactical concept I've recently explained in a video on Cunha and Bumo and Ekitike. Emmanuel Omega, Moise Kean and Max Meerdink are all players who I think should be kept tabs on over the next 1 to 2 seasons, as right now I'd say they have the perfect statistical output to suggest that they could break through into the elite level within the next 1 to 4 seasons. So let me know what you think of the players I've mentioned in this video, and if you want to check out any cheap, good quality football jerseys, go over to Jersey FIFA. You can use code ALANTAS at checkout to get 10% off. I'll leave it linked in the description and comment section below. And if you want to sign up to my Patreon to get some other content, some of my articles, or to get access to the Instagram discussion group chat, I'll leave the Patreon linked on the end screen now as well.